Alright, let's go ahead and talk about the two new releases that are coming out this Friday, which is technically today when I'm shooting this, but I don't know when this will go out. But we're going to start with Halloween Kills, which is the direct follow-up to David Gordon Green's movie from 2018 that was considered a direct sequel to just the original with everything else sort of retconned, and this one just goes right into it after we left off with that last one, and immediately it's answering some questions that I had leaving that one, like the whole douchey boyfriend where they went to the Halloween party as Bonnie and Clyde, and of course this guy has to now go through this entire movie still in his Bonnie costume, but yeah, we actually start with him, of all people, because it was one of those cases where when the last movie ended, it was like, what even was that storyline, and what, like, the whole, him, like, throwing her phone away, and it's like, who is this dude, why is he reacting this way, and why did we never see him again? Well, they answer that question immediately, so if you're, of all the things that happened in the last movie, if your first question was, what happened to the douchey boyfriend, that's the answer you get immediately. And he comes across Will Patton, who is still injured from the last movie, because it's literally, like, minutes later as far as the last one ending. And something kind of amazing happens here in this opening scene, this sort of cold open before we get the opening credits. Going back to 1978 and seeing, like, the young version of Will Patton's character, who is Thomas Mann. And another question we get answered that we were all kind of asking was, how did Michael go from the end of the original movie to eventually getting caught and having been in this prison this whole time? And we get to see that as well. But it's actually... that sounds like quite simple. It's like, oh, we just see him get caught. But it's like a whole sequence where we get this whole other thing. And there's also a whole side thing going on with... Lonnie, the kid that was bullying Tommy and then got scared away from the front door by Loomis. Yeah, he's like a major player now and has this big backstory. And I love the way they recreated him, especially with like the red jacket and the 12 shirt, even the hair. Like it's because we don't really get an amazing look at Lonnie in the original movie. It's weird how much it even looks like the same kid, which obviously it isn't, but. And through, I'm guessing, it looks like deleted scenes, possibly, and probably some CGI here and there, bringing in, like, tying up a lot of stuff from the original movie, like, seeing Annie's body, and then Loomis still having, like, a very brief part here. And it could seem like really easy fan service, where, like, you know, we get the score immediately, the one that we recognize immediately when we go back to 1978, which plays a bigger part than I think you would think as far as the whole... It's like practically going back in a time machine when we hear that theme and it says Halloween 1978, and then we're right back there in the events of the first movie after it had ended. But also we follow the cops, one of which is Jim Cummings, also the writer, director, and actor we've seen a couple of movies from now. And they go inside the Myers house and we see, like, the dead dog there. And it's like, even the dead dog feels like, you know, just like a little bit of fan service. Like, oh, I know these things. And usually I'd be kind of quick to dismiss that because it'd be, like, cheap and easy. But I don't know if it's just because Halloween's, like, my favorite horror movie ever. And it's one that most of us have probably seen at least 100 times. It was all kind of working. Like, to kind of go back to that and see that night from, like, different angles. There was just something really almost kind of surreal, but also like really satisfying about that. And it doesn't feel like it's like desecrating it or anything. Like that's also kind of a worry you would think you'd have as far as like continuing on that night in particular, straight from the original movie. But no, I thought all that stuff, like that's honestly probably the highlight of the movie is the 1978 stuff, which is really great. And then, of course, we do eventually come back around, and once again, we're right in it where we left off, where Laurie and her daughter and granddaughter are leaving the scene, and the firefighters are coming. It's such this interesting scenario of basically firefighters being a sign of doom for once, because it's like the one case where you just want everything to go down. That like it's haunting to hear Jamie Lee Curtis just screaming "Let it burn," like pleading these pleas that can't be heard, and then there's a lot of insanity in this movie, but it's a conflicting feeling because it's certainly some of the directions they go and some of the imagery are insane in the really great way, but there's also some of it where you kind of wonder how much it's maybe overdoing it a little bit, because I do think one thing that's been kind of missing that was there in the 2018 movie, but it would sort of drift in and out sometimes, is this whole idea of being a direct continuation from the original movie. Even I mean, obviously there's like 40 years in between, but still, the whole idea of like having like the aesthetic of it and like having it actually feel like it's in the same like in the same universe and in the same realm. But there are some cases where it's sort of, and it's not even necessarily like modern touches or anything like that. It's just sometimes it almost feels like where, and I think I talked about this a little bit when I talked about the last one, which is they're kind of walking dangerous ground where it almost sometimes feel like they're going into like the Rob Zombie aesthetic and the Rob Zombie feel. Which if you're trying to directly come from the original and be in the original's world, that's not the place that you want to be. In like anywhere near the Rob Zombie stuff. But it's almost like some sort of middle ground between Carpenter and Zombie, and I feel like it works enough. But like as it goes on, and it almost kind of feels like it distances itself more and more from just kind of the feel of the original. And one thing that immediately is going to come to mind is how brutal the kills are, because we saw how overly brutal zombies movies were, and typically it's not the thing that I'm that concerned about. Normally I would expect a killer to kill and be brutal, and for death scenes to be creative and bloody and stuff like that. But once again, if we're still dealing with the world of the original, Michael wasn't a creative killer. There was a stabbing and a couple of strangulations, and that's roughly it. So this whole idea of him, not only that, but that was younger Michael. We're now dealing with like old man Michael. And now suddenly he's more like the Rob Zombie version, where everything has to be super brutal and super bloody. And I know, because the original movie is practically bloodless. We see like the dude in like on the side of the road after he stole the truck, and Judith had some blood on her, and that was basically it. All the other kills in the original are pretty much bloodless entirely. So this idea to really focus on how gory they could be just doesn't really feel like it fits if they're trying to go with that and continue on with that and that aesthetic. So, like I said, it's not being against gore or violence in general, but it just seems like it's hard to feel like you're immersing yourself in the same world, which is what these movies are asking you to do. And I don't know. But that being said, stuff like the imagery of, Michael Myers taking out a bunch of firefighters as he emerges from a fire, is a little too insane to resist. Like, that's the kind of thing where it's like, that's where I feel like this movie succeeds at times, is when it finds just the right amount of crazy to give you this sort of imagery that you would never really expect to see, that you would only see in a movie that has, as nightmarish of a setup. But yeah, sometimes it does feel like it's quite literally overkill in a way that's, like I said, distancing itself just a little too much from what it's trying to be, I think. But maybe that's just me, I don't know. But as far as like staying in that realm, even though we've completely retconned the original Halloween 2, it does feel like there's a weird amount of callbacks to that, intentional or not, I can't tell. But like how one of his first kills after he's gotten away is an old couple, which feels very much like that creepy scene in the second original movie. And then obviously Laurie being in the hospital for pretty much the whole thing also feels very much like that one. And it's like I don't know if they're like if that's the idea of like it's weird to kind of embrace the stuff that you're also saying go fuck yourself to, like the retconning, but also it's like, oh, but let's homage that anyway. It feels a little confused in in that regard, but we do get a lot of familiar faces, which is appealing. Like Charles Cyrus, I believe his name is Brackett from the original movie, is somebody I wasn't expecting to see in this. I'm not even completely sure I knew he was alive, but and it's great that he's here. And then we have Marion, who was the doctor with Loomis when Michael first escaped in the original movie. Same character, same actress. Kyle Richards, who we've known for a while, was coming back. I'm not sure what is up with the original Tommy. I do know that they thought about the idea of getting Paul Rudd to go on the sixth movie from the original series. Once again, even though you're retconning it, I don't know, but given the direction the character goes, I don't know that I could imagine Paul Rudd doing this. I actually think he would have, but the only reason he didn't was because of the new Ghostbusters that he was already in. Otherwise, we would have. This would have been. It would have been weird to see Paul Rudd as this Tom because Anthony Michael Hall seems pretty well cast. I remember thinking that it was a good choice when I heard that. But the idea that he's like a sort of vengeance-seeking Tommy, and he's the one that's like starting up mobs to go after Michael, and it's like I don't know. I mean, Paul Rudd does have more range than you could probably give him credit for, but I don't know. I just feel like what Anthony Michael Hall did here is about right, and I can't really kind of imagine it another way, at least at the moment. But there are moments also where we do find time to sort of find the emotion in it a little bit, where it is like a nonstop slasher movie. But there are moments where like we have Toby Huss's character, who was the husband of Judy Greer, thus the father of her daughter and Laurie's granddaughter. After his death scene, we actually get a moment where like he knew Lonnie at some point in their childhood, and I'm pretty sure Lonnie's name dropped by him in the last movie. And there's a moment where they kind of reminisce about him, and then the daughter just kind of starts crying, and then it's like little moments like that are nice to see in movies like this with like a lot of death in them, where slasher movies don't really usually get the chance to kind of focus on emotion because everything's happening so quickly. So it is nice to see that, but there's a lot of stuff going on, like a lot of stuff. There's this really brief thing going on with an inmate that's sort of apparently escaped along with Michael, who's just kind of running around now, and he doesn't. His whole thing seems pretty directionless. I'm assuming his main purpose is just to show the danger of like mob mentality. And how there's like kind of a turning point where this angry mob that's going after Michael might be kind of turning in the wrong direction. There might be some irony here that these people are so bloodthirsty and going after Michael for that very reason. So there could be something there, but it's not really explored or anything. I guess you just kind of have to assume, but for the most part, it just kind of wants to be a bloodbath. Which, in a slasher movie, that's another thing that you would want, but there's not really much that it's offering to, like, breathe any fresh air into it, kind of like it was clear they were trying to do with the last one. But even the last one still got criticized a lot for just kind of still being a slasher movie with not a whole lot of that freshness. But there's some stuff here, and like I said, even though it feels weird to see Michael as, like, a creative killer, if you want to call it that, there are still some fun death scenes. So it's hard to not give it credit for that. Like I said, it's just hard to tell exactly what it's trying to be when you take into account it trying to be in the same world. So and also talking about the whole the first movie practically being bloodless thing. Sometimes it's like like we see after her injuries when she's first taken to the hospital, we see Laurie's surgery for some reason, and it's like they're trying to bring as much gore and blood into it as possible, which is, like I said, when you look at the original, it's something that I don't get, why we're going that route. But there's that, I guess, and I suppose it could somehow lose its luster if Michael stayed an uncreative killer and was just stabbing once or strangling, but you kind of see what's why it works so well in the original movie, and how Halloween is one of the prime examples of using like tension and dread and build up, with kills being very brief and gore being practically non-existent, and that's what makes it legendary and what makes so many horror movies like it at its time work so well. But now we're just kind of getting caught up in this. And this is something that's been going on forever. Like, I feel like I'm in the early 2000s having this conversation right now saying gore is taking over scares, but I mean, that really feels like what's happening here. And it's like there's hardly any build-up to these. Like, he spends more time killing people than there is build-up to him killing people. And that's... I don't know if that's the way to go. But also, and also just the fact that because we see this so much, when major kills start happening, I just kind of felt weirdly numb to them. And it's like none of the kills really mattered. When it's clear some of them definitely should. But I guess once you see all the brutality and the blood and the death and all that, by the end you're just kind of like, well, there's another body, and then that's about it. And it doesn't really feel like we're going much in a direction because we already know, like, David Gordon Green is trying for a trilogy, and we already know that they have already planned what's going to finish this story, supposedly, with Halloween Ends, which is like next year or 2 years from now, I don't remember. With all the delays this had, I don't know where things are anymore. But, so that kind of kills the suspense. The idea of, like, knowing you're a middle movie, which means you don't really have a beginning and you don't really have an end. You're just basically the middle. And it's just like, this is basically just the stepping stone to get us to the last one. And when you see some of the stuff they do here, like the mobs and some of the choices, like some of the character choices, a lot of this feels like a finale. Like, if this movie had just been like 10 or 15 minutes longer, I feel like you could have easily ended this story. But so I don't know what's left for that, but I'm assuming, since we've known for a while now that, like, when the first one came out, we knew this one and Halloween Ends were coming, so I'm assuming they have a full plan. But after this, I'm curious what that could possibly be, like how much could be left, especially with this movie's length, which I guess you could chalk up to the addition of the 1978 scenes, but despite being an hour 46 seemed kind of long for a Halloween movie. I think there's some that are about that length in the previous series, I think. But for the most part, like, an hour and a half pretty much perfectly did the job. And like I said, for a movie that doesn't really feel like it goes anywhere, it feels a little longer. So I don't... yeah, so I was like into it and like engrossed in it when I was watching it, but like now in retrospect is where like the cracks are kind of starting to show, and I don't know about a lot of these choices, but I guess we'll hold out because there, like I was talking about with like the open ends that we had in the last movie, and like how they're kind of being addressed in this one. So it's like I'm curious if there's stuff that seems like, oh, that was kind of pointless in this, if there's more, sort of planned with the directions to go in. With the last one, I still don't really know what their plan is, because obviously they're ending a trilogy with the next one, but then I was hearing that Jason Blum still wants to keep doing Halloween movies after David Gordon Green is done, so I don't know. We'll see how they can stretch this out, but we need an injection of freshness in this last one, since we're heading in that direction. So we'll see if they can actually do something definitive. We already had a great definitive Michael Myers death scene at the end of H2O, and we saw how that went. So and we got Busta Rhymes dancing around in a Michael Myers costume, and I think we all just died a little bit along with the victims in that movie, but yeah. So we'll see what the last one brings, I guess, which is not the best thing to say about a movie, to rely on another movie to pick it up, but we'll just see what happens. I'm imagining more kills, um, probably more brutal, and then probably some kind of finale that will ultimately feel underwhelming because at this rate, even if you do kill Michael Myers in quotes for good, we're just gonna kind of assume that that's not the case. It's like even if David Gordon Green says, "Oh no, in my story he's done," but it's like, all right, but he's not gonna ever be really done. So what are we even trying to do endings for? Like we're just gonna keep going forever. So that's basically how I feel about that. So yeah. So let's go on to The Last Duel, which was my most anticipated movie of last year. And I kind of thought we might have possibly gotten it because Ridley Scott had talked about working on it in the middle of COVID, like doing the editing of the stuff they'd already had. And especially, seeing, the miracle that he did with all the money in the world in that short amount of time. Ridley Scott is still clearly a beast in his old age. But we're getting it now. And it is nice that it seems like they kind of took that time to probably polish it up more because the movie looks very, very good. The movie looks like they spent time on it. So I am very grateful for that. And obviously, something that's now been talked about to death, but is worth mentioning again, is the idea that this is Ben Affleck and Matt Damon reteaming as writers for the first time since Good Will Hunting somehow. And they have decided that because this story has such a female center to it, that they should bring in another writer in Nicole Holofcener, who apparently was very confused at her hiring because this is not the kind of stuff she writes. She's got a lot of great stuff, like Enough Said, and I think Friends with Money is hers, and that one she did with Ben Mendelsohn a few years ago that I really liked. And I think Lovely and Amazing is hers as well. Like seriously, check out her stuff, especially if you're into like the indie scene. If you're into the indie scene, you probably already have. But they have come together and have told this story, this shockingly true story, which I do. I have the book around here somewhere. That's pretty close to what we see here. But they did make the ingenious decision to do the Rashomon approach, where we're seeing the same events of the movie from the three different perspectives of Damon, Adam Driver, and Jodie Comer. And this whole idea of this Damon and Driver being these a knight and a squire who were friends at one point, and things just kind of kept getting between them and separating them, and then Damon basically came to hate Driver with a passion because everything was falling into his favor, while Damon was getting shut out, and then this ultimately results in something that causes Damon to suggest that they legally duel to the death, which was like the last duel of its kind, being the title. And there's a lot of interesting stuff they do here, and it is like a lengthy 2.5 hours, but the idea of breaking the story up the way they do and giving everyone like a full and complete perspective where it doesn't feel like we only see like biases once we see like all three of them together, but it's like it gives the time of day to each of these three individual characters, even though it does single out that one of them is likely the absolute truth, which makes perfect sense. And the way they're able to do that with like the certain subtleties, like this is the kind of movie where I feel like will be liked even better when it can be watched at home and you can like really observe like the differences, like the really really subtle differences, where there's some scenes where it's clear that the characters have viewed something in a different way, so it'll be portrayed in a different way in their portion of the story. But then there's also stuff in there that like I knew there was some kind of change, but I couldn't quite catch it. And I said that's gonna be something that's like really like enriches the movie on rewatch, is like and like getting like the scenes side by side at some point will probably be really cool, and seeing just all those, and sometimes it's just something really really small also, and it's but like it's almost like the smaller the moments are, the more impactful it is that they are different, and how this whole idea of like the whole thing is kind of basically built on the fact that fleeting moments can be fateful in like this really really big way. Like fleeting moments can be catastrophic in the right context or the wrong context. Um, but as far as it being like a sort of like classic battle movie, because obviously, Ridley Scott's given us like Gladiator and Kingdom of Heaven and movies like that. Movies that a lot of people I've heard have been kind of missing. And this might scratch that itch a little bit. It's not like entirely that, and they're not like lengthy scenes, but they have the quality of something like Gladiator or Braveheart or something like that, and just that type of movie that some people have kind of wished would kind of make a comeback. And if anybody was gonna help that sort of genre have a comeback, it would certainly be Ridley Scott. He's had some misses in that kind of category also, but also these. I keep hearing this whole thing about Kingdom of Heaven's director's cut being significantly better and amazing, and I'm not a Kingdom of Heaven fan, but I've only seen the theatrical version, so I should probably look into that at some point. But so in the meantime, blind to the director's cut of Kingdom of Heaven, I will give him credit for it's in that territory probably for the better. And and it's also the whole idea of seeing like this sort of the chaos of those scenes where like it's just armies colliding and blood flying and stuff like that, where it's like it feels like chaos, but it's very well choreographed. And so that's the kind of thing where you can kind of get lost in it if it just kind of feels like things smashing together and just sort of noise. But when you see like these individual moments of like fighting in battle and stuff like that, then it can really the stuff that we eventually see in the duel itself, just amidst these battle sequences, feels really well done, and like there was a lot of care put into them. And like I said, despite the fact of all of that, it can still just feel like total chaos. Is clear. It takes a shitload of talent to bring that to the screen. And as far as like, I guess starting with the performances going down the line, what Damon might be a bit distracting because of the hair and the accents and stuff like that. But I do find it interesting to see his performance progress as the movie goes on, because he's the one character where I guess you could say Adam Driver's technically the antagonist. Damon's the character where it's like when we first see him, because it starts with his perspective, he can be like really sympathetic, and we see like the pressure he's under to carry his family name, but in all this stuff and like the land dispute and thinking that all this stuff is owed to him but it's being given to somebody else can make him seem sympathetic, and then as each other person's perspective comes in, the less and less sympathetic he gets. And to sort of see that progression in his performance is really great, and how like he goes from being this really heroic character to this person that's just like boisterous and embarrassing, and it's like in like this sort of brutish way, and it's the way he's able to. And it could seem like super over the top because he does have a lot of yelling and shouty scenes. Like I said, it's really the idea that, especially in like Driver's story, where he's a character that looks heroic in his own eyes, but he's just like constantly embarrassing himself, particularly in public. Especially as he tries to further and further battle Driver over these just, petty things. And like I said, the fact that all this is basically a land dispute that just escalates into a fight to the death pretty much says everything about where these two guys are coming from, with Jodie Comer just caught in the middle of it. And yeah, as far as Driver goes, what I really liked about what he was doing here was the way it's not just in the different stories he's different, but he's also a character that is different from each person he interacts with, even in his own story. Where like whenever he's interacting with Ben Affleck, he's a significantly different character than like any other time we see him. Because Affleck is basically like accepted him, and of course Affleck's a guy that's in like full power. So he's just kind of getting drunk off that, being that close to that power, and being able to basically that's why everything kind of falls into his lap. It's just his closeness with this dude. But then we have stuff where like there is another scene where Damon kind of humiliates himself in front of both of them, And it's the idea that he doesn't, despite their dispute, he doesn't seem to be taking any pleasure in Damon being on the bad side of this. There's this perfect moment when he has another outburst in public, and like everybody is laughing, like Ben Affleck's laughing at him, everybody's laughing at him, and Driver's just sort of completely stone faced, like he's getting no pleasure out of this misfortune at all, despite the fact that we do get to see some pretty dark sides to Driver's character. Even in his own story, it kind of starts to come through, and you can see it's a dude that has a dark side, but is basically trying his best to not see himself that way. I don't even know if I can fully say he doesn't see himself that way. It's almost like he's kind of in denial. You get the vibe when we're seeing him through his own eyes, which is really interesting and gives Driver a lot to work with. Um, and there's a great moment here. It's really brief, but he has a dream sequence that I found really interesting because it just looks like it's any other scene, and then we get the classic he sits up in bed and he's sweating thing. And the way that was handled, where it's like, because it felt like just another scene, and there was no hint that it was a dream sequence. We're not quite sure what has happened when it's revealed that it's a dream sequence. And I love the idea of us kind of being just as disoriented as him, where it's like when you wake up from a dream, and there's still like that middle ground your mind's in, where it's like, is that still happening? Is that real, or was that just the dream? And then it doesn't take you long to figure that out, and that's about as long it takes for us to realize, oh, that was a dream sequence. And it's just that little thing just kind of stood out to me on like the filmmaking aspect. Um, and then of course we get the Jodie Comer perspective, who obviously you've probably already heard a lot of acclaim about, and for good reason. Because it's, first off, it does feel like it's intentionally turning a certain trope on its head about the whole wife character, where there's so many movies like this where the wife character is just kind of there, and the actress is always just like, it's usually a name actress, and she's always completely wasted in the part, where it's like, why did they even cast her? It was a nothing part. And so it does seem like at first that she is just in the background, and she's there to just kind of encourage Damon and do all that, and then once again, as more and more is revealed, the more we see the different deaths of her, and the fact that it eventually, even though it's them dueling to the death, it still kind of comes down to all the stakes sort of landing on her. And the way she's able to portray that sort of, there's a strength in her that's kind of battling through a sort of helplessness. Like, I don't want to just say helplessness by itself, because I would do the performance a disservice and the character a disservice. But you can see the struggle very clearly throughout, and it doesn't take a whole lot of, like, the acting that you would expect, the acting that goes big to prove the point as much as it possibly can. There isn't really much, if any, of that. I could almost maybe see some, like, Falconetti, Passion of Joan of Arc comparisons to some of the shots of her and her expressions speaking for themselves. And those three are the central part of this. There's also Affleck, who's surprisingly getting a lot of acclaim, which I am happy about. He's kind of like the levity of the movie, basically, where he's got a lot of the comedic moments and comedic lines, and he's going over the top, but not like over the top in the way you might expect, like super over the top or anything like that. Who's also drastically changed his appearance, like Damon did. But if I do have one problem with that character, he might almost feel a little too modern to kind of fit in with this. I don't know if that's just the Affleck casting in general, but I feel like the feel of the character also. And there's also, this is a little weird, but there's a reference to Pierce nipples that also kind of stood out to me as, I mean, not to say that hasn't been happening for however long it's probably been happening, but that's another, I think it's the reaction to it also, was like, it just felt weirdly modern, like a conversation you would hear today. Because I think they intentionally didn't go too much into, like, the language of the era. Because I think all three of them, Affleck, Damon, and Hollister, have said that they have no experience with that whatsoever. So it's just enough to buy into the period, but it's not, like, indistinguishable from language now. There is one instance where they keep referring to the Little Death, and is it really weird that the reason I know what the Little Death is Bride of Chucky of all things? But so there's that. That's about as close as we get to like them sort of embracing the language of the time, I guess. But yeah, so I think mainly though, it's those subtle changes that I'm really interested to go back to this movie to see. Even though obviously the title duel is also incredible. I do think some people might be underwhelmed to go into a 2.5 hour movie and realize that the duel that's being built up is only like the last 15 minutes, but they make it worth it. I assure you. um, yeah, it's like I said, the thing I really am interested in revisiting is seeing all those differences in the perspective when you go back and watch it again. Because like I said, some of them are very blatant and obvious, but I also feel like I probably missed some also. Especially in like a crucial scene where like there's a point in time where Driver shuts a door, and the first time we see this, the camera is on like the other side of the door, and then he closes it like on the camera's face, and then that's the kind of moment where you expect it to cut to another scene, but we cut to inside the room right after that, and it's almost like this feeling of being trapped in this moment that we know is coming, and it's yeah, so stuff like that I was really appreciating also. So as far as it being my most anticipated movie of last year, I don't know if I was as into it as I was hoping to be, despite how very good it still is. But I am wondering, like I said, how much it's going to get richer in quality the more you get to explore in like closer detail the slight differences in there. So that's basically what I'm most looking forward to going back to it. Whenever that is. So, yeah, and I guess we'll talk about it at the end of the month about where we stand as far as its potential awards chances. I'm still not entirely sure, but we'll figure that out in that video. So, yeah, so I guess I can just end this here. I believe, actually, I know next week is Dune, so that's going to be fun. And then after that, I believe, is Last Night in Soho and Antlers. And then we should be done for new releases for that month, for this month. And in between, obviously, we'll do all the stuff we've been doing. And you by now, you know what all that is. Yeah, so I think until whatever the next thing is, I think that's it.